Welcome to the 5th Nature Calling Conversation podcast from the National Landscape Association. Nature Calling Conversations bring together artists and experts from across disciplines to chat about artistic practice. This conversation is one of a series of 6, part of a wider programme of work taking place across England between May and October 2025. For this conversation, Trish Evans and Nick Humphreys of INSTAR, the commissioned artists for Lincolnshire World's National Landscape, spoke with campaigner and conservationist Mark Avery about finding the balance between food production and nature restoration, the importance of engaging people in the discussion, and how art can help support in those conversations.
Shelf Life was a sort of project that we kind of curated in response to the Lincolnshire Wolds, the sort of topography and the land use of the area. And that presented to us some really interesting approaches just simply around how to even create art and put art in the space that is the land. And that was very much thinking about the sort of the fragmentation or the sort of access to the land was something that was really important to us. And our process to reach the conclusion of Shelf Life and the sort of series of messaging around Shelf Life was a lot of site sort of visitations and going around the walls to connect with the landscape, speak to those who manage the land, inform our creative process, and as a result of that, Shelf Life was the result really, which was very much about that statistic that the Wolds is 92% farmed, which is a very distinctive characteristic. So we really wanted to reflect upon that and create this quite unconventional presentation of art with the billboard and the use of advertising as a medium for art and pasting up a design. And relaying that response from our perspective of that landscape and the challenges it's facing. Is that fair to say, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, the Shelf Life is also, it's like a pun, which is also about things that are shelved. So things that are marginalized and pushed out of sight as well.
Yeah. And I think our sort of approach was about conversation. And as part of our practice process is very much about our own connection to land and space and the environment and nature. And through that, we had some really great conversations on location with the landowners and also the National Landscapes team, and also conservation projects and individuals who are campaigning and supporting sort of improved nature conservation, the Chalk Streams project, for example. So those conversations really fuel us as artists. It's integral to our practice anyway as naturalists and as artists to really discover and learn more. And we felt with this, with the whole premise of nature calling, what is nature calling, and is there a call there? And there were distinctive features that really triggered us in terms of our
We've visited some regenerative farms as well, which was very interesting to feel the contrast of being out in the more industrial areas and then into the regenerative areas. And there was a stark contrast in the amount of wildlife that was present.
Yeah. And I think as well, just as artists, the landscape offers a fantastic visual for us. We had an idea of it. We've never created a billboard that's touring a landscape, by the way. This is a really quite an ambitious thing for us to consider doing. We knew that. We wanted to push ourselves. We wanted to bring art within that viewpoint. You travel through the Wolds, you see the rolling and undulating sort of hillsides, which is what really is the distinctive characteristic that people feel very connected to in the local area. This is a really distinctive feature. A lot of Lincolnshire is quite flat, so the Wolds does have that sort of topography that's really kind of stunning for a lot of people to witness and see. And we wanted to put our billboard into spaces that would punctuate that view. And so we did a lot of scouting around and talking to landowners, having some interesting conversations about access to those spaces, and playing with that viewpoint and bringing in this platform.
And Mark, I was just wondering, with your history of campaigning, whether you could sort of reflect a little bit about how once you sort of have an idea of what your campaign is, how you start those conversations as well, and that kind of reaching out and bringing people along your journey, because it is about hearts and mind as well as sort of getting cross about something maybe.
quite good at getting cross about things.
It's a good start. It's an impetus, isn't it?
Let me take it back a bit further, because I'm a scientist by training, and scientists tend to think that once you've found out enough about something, then it will be obvious to everyone what you ought to do. It's kind of, well, this is how we've measured the problem, so the solution is this thing out there. That never works. And as a scientist working in the RSPB, I had to understand gradually that you do have to have a conversation with people, and that tends to be called either advocacy and campaigning are quite similar to each other, but advocacy tends to be more with individuals. So if you could have a conversation with the Prime Minister, that would be advocacy. If you try to influence the Prime Minister by flooding the media with stories about the things that you think the Prime Minister ought to be doing, saying, addressing, and if he can hear people marching down Whitehall from Downing Street, that's campaigning. But you need to understand that different people are coming from different starting places. They have different needs. So in a farmed landscape, farmers clearly have different needs than do tourists, who are maybe just driving through because the place is pretty and are looking for a nice pub to have lunch. Whereas all the bits around them are the workplace of farmers, and they have to make a living. And their viewpoints will be different. So you need different ways to get those conversations going. And it's just the same when you're trying to persuade a government department or a council or a country to change its mind or change what it's doing. And you have to use all sorts of means. And so this type of visual art is one of them. And I think what Trish and Nick have done is really, I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Oh, well, it'd be really lovely to hear a bit more about some of your perhaps bigger campaigns, and obviously your quite well-known ones. But before we go into that, it might be good just to have a listen to the soundtrack from the film.
Where the hedgerows across distance once did unfold, where the teeth and claw and orchids grew, and was the earth so verdant and burnished gold, and the meadow diamond with the morning dew? And did the circus weightless flight, did it adorn these skies with woven grace? And was this land in dawn's fair light a wild and breathless dwelling place? So bring me no tools of steel and fire, no factory seed, no burning plough. Bring me the heart's old fierce desire to tend the earth with gentle vow. Bring me the songs that the rivers once knew, the woodland's hushed moon-soaked lullaby. Bring me the hope, the rains, the dew, the ascending flight of the summer sky. And let the moss reclaim the stone, let the dog rose entwine the rusting gate, 'cause the land remembers all of those that it's known, and patiently it lies in wait. So in the future, may we walk with feet of lighter tread, and mark the curlew's returning song, and let not our nature's need be those of dread, but woven through each and every one. For every hedge that the hawthorn weaves, each bluebell born of majesty and rain, still offers us through gleaming leaf a path back home to the wild again. So let the moss reclaim that stone. Let the dog rose entwine that rusting gate. 'Cause the land remembers all of those that it's known. And patiently it lies in wait.
If you'd like to see the film, you can find it on the Nature Calling website under INSTAR's project page, Shelf Life. I just wondered, Trish and Nick, you just maybe just say a little bit about the film, particularly the poetry that was used within it.
Yeah, we always knew we wanted to make a film because the billboards were momentarily in spaces. So we've often been asked, oh, where can we see them? And it's like, it's actually momentary. And that sort of fleeting kind of messaging was really quite important to our piece, really. It was sort of like to capture it in situ. In terms of the composition, the sort of split screen was something we concluded with, and we were thinking throughout. It was a bit of an evolution, really, wasn't it? About what we wanted to contrast, with the imagery that we're capturing, and whether that split screen would even be things like food production and that journey from field to shelf life. But we then changed our sort of viewpoint on it a little bit, thinking very carefully around the very distinctive viewpoints of this land with the long straight roads through Lincolnshire particularly, which is very distinctive to the area. Also, as well, those verges are actually, classified as, some of those are classified as nature reserve, which is a really interesting element too. But I think the composition of the poetry was very much coming from, as well, the written word and the poetry aspect to even the nature calling as a whole. We worked with Isha, and she created some poetry. Also, we wanted to sort of reflect the use of the written word and spoken word within our piece. We felt that would make it give it a new dimension and a new way of engaging with the visual art. And then, of course, we composed those sounds, which have got quite a few sound recordings of certain species that we've interlaid into that.
So there's curlews and skylarks and lapwings throughout. But the poetry was pieced together on the basis of William Blake's Jerusalem, which talks about obviously the green pleasant land that we all know about, but also the sort of rejection of industrialization and a return to a more spiritual connection with the land, more care taken over the land.
Yeah, and I think that sort of idea of the green and pleasant land, that you can look at green, you can look at places and see beauty and see green as beauty. Those words are interpreted in different ways for different people, aren't they? And so we really wanted to sort of reflect upon that idea with the green and pleasant land and the use of poetry in this piece as a sort of like, the word green doesn't necessarily mean biodiverse at all. It can be very monoculture and very much a desert of nature, so to speak. So it's sort of like we wanted to sort of play with that kind of tone of poetry, didn't we? That was kind of a big deal for us. And we wanted to play, of course, with the idea of the quickening up of the message and then bringing it down again and having that sort of dynamic movement within the piece, and keeping it kind of short.
It's interesting you talk about the green as well. I mean, when I walk into a landscape, I tend to use sound more than sight. And if I can't hear anything, that's not a good sign, really. And we found the Lincolnshire Wolds very quiet. And you go there in spring and it is very green, but it's going to be the first shoots of corn coming through, or those few species of grass that are used for grazing, the rye grasses or the meadow grass, which are still more or less a monoculture, mixed with a bit of clover, admittedly. But yeah, but if there's no sound, if there's no buzzing of bees or no skylarks, we heard crows, we saw pigeons, which is very, very usual for farmland, but we didn't see many of the hedgerow birds that you'd expect to see, and we didn't hear any skylarks and things like that. So yeah, sound is important in these situations.
Yeah.
Within a generation, we have lost half the skylarks and almost all of the turtle doves and 9 out of 10 corn buntings. It's a pretty dull looking bird, the corn bunting, but surely it deserves to be able to live in a farmed landscape like that. And some conversations I've had with farmers start from the position, there's nothing wrong with wildlife on my farm or my neighbour's farms, and you lot are all talking a load of rubbish, which is where I tend to get back to the scientist in me, because we've got just shed loads of surveys, national surveys, that show that, and this is in every report that groups of NGOs bring out, that the farmed landscape is the one that has lost most wildlife over the last 50 years. So you got to kind of start with, hopefully, that there is a problem which we ought to try and find a way of making less of a problem or even solving. And then you meet a couple of types of farmers, some of whom say, well, I didn't want to do any of this, but the grants and the regulations and the need to make money force me to do this. I'd quite like it if I could go back to some of the old ways, not the old ways, but I still do have to make a living. And that is, and others just are going, well, no, I want to get as many tons of wheat per hectare as possible. So farming isn't a uniform landscape of views. It's a big continuum. It's not farmers growing food for farmers to eat. They're growing food, but as a commodity, which is sold. Much of it is sold on a world market now. And so the way that society treats farming affects the way in which farmers will treat their farms. And so each of us has some skin in the game. And I suppose as an environmental campaigner, the missing skylarks and turtle doves and corn buntings don't have a voice. They do not have an MP. They can't go and talk to a farmer on their own. They can't march in London holding a placard. So somebody has to do that for them. And I've spent quite a lot of my time trying to do that for them, mostly with conspicuous lack of success.
Yeah, and it's association. I think your words within the landscape are an interesting juxtaposition, particularly around the kind of food produce side of things. I was just wondering, obviously, a big part of what you did with Shelf Life was engage a lot of young people. I just wondered how you kind of addressed some of these issues, and also, that sort of I wouldn't say introducing the landscape to them, but I mean maybe articulating some of the things that sit within the landscape which they live in. I mean, were they aware of it, for instance?
Well, it's interesting just sort of like thinking about the voice of nature and giving voice to nature, as Mark just sort of mentioned. This sort of idea of working with print was really important to us, particularly when you think about our sort of platform of using billboards as well, and the power of print, and even the print industrial kind of revolution and the invention of the printing press as campaigning messages or getting your voice heard. So we really wanted to specifically work with teenagers across the world. So yeah, you're right, we worked with over 70 teenagers, and we didn't just drop in once. We actually worked with those groups on 3 occasions for whole afternoons at a time. So we were really connected and building relationships with them. And what we did with our process was obviously going through the process of just art production and making art, but looking locally at art inspiration and looking at species that are vulnerable or lost species of the area.
Or that could return.
Yeah. So it's really highlighting that you don't have to look beyond where you are to try and realize that there is the exotic or the wondrous art that's beyond linkage walls. No, it's here actually, or it was here, and let's look at that more closely. So really taking that deep dive into species and the habitats that they require to live, and just understanding that they are your neighbours, your local area, and to look closely, but it's in trouble. So bringing in that voice, and the way that we created our printing was that we did printing of species, but then also working with that advertising language We thought about things such as, how, for example, a beauty product is sold, 100% happiness guaranteed, or strange and unusual marketing techniques and basically, what's the USP of the nature that's around here? What would you be saying to attract that wonder of that nature locally? And so we created these big composition posters with groups as well as individual prints, and that coming together was pretty phenomenal. Actually, it took us by surprise, the outcomes that were achieved and the energy that resulted in bringing these young people into the sort of fold of the idea of shelf life.
A huge thank you to Trish, Nick and Mark. Join us for the 6th and final Nature Calling conversation with Becca Gill, Artistic Director of Radical Ritual, the commissioned artist for Dorset National Landscape, and author Sita Brahmachari, who was part of the Radical Ritual team, talking about their project Consequences. Visit naturecalling.org.uk to find out more about the programme.